When I was 8, Ethan Caldwell pulled me from the fire that killed my family. For 10 years, the powerful crime boss was my protector and my god. Then, he announced his engagement to another woman to unite two criminal empires. He brought her home and named her the future mistress of the Caldwell family. In front of everyone, his fiancée forced a cheap metal collar around my neck, calling me their pet. Ethan knew I was allergic. He just watched, his eyes cold, and ordered me to take it. That night, I listened through the walls as he took her to his bed. I finally understood the promise he'd made me as a child was a lie. I wasn't his family, I was his property. After a decade of devotion, my love for him finally turned to ash. So on his birthday, the day he celebrated his new future, I walked out of his gilded cage for good. A private jet was waiting to take me to my real father, his greatest enemy. I learned my life was over the day Ethan Caldwell announced his engagement to another woman. It wasn't a whisper in the grand empty halls of the Caldwell estate. It wasn't a quiet confession in the dead of night. It was a headline stark and black on the screen of my phone, a news alert that buzzed on the marble countertop like a dying insect. Ethan Caldwell, Dawn of New York's most powerful family, to Wednesday Victoria Langston, uniting two criminal empires. The words blurred. My world narrowed to the phone in my hand, the cold weight of it a sudden shocking anchor in a sea of disbelief. This had to be a mistake, a power play, a lie designed to smoke out an enemy. It couldn't be real, because Ethan was mine. He had been mine since I was 8 years old. I remember the fire, the acrid smell of smoke and fear that filled my lungs. The Harper family, my family, was being torn apart, and I was just a piece of collateral damage left behind. Then he appeared through the flames, a boy of 16 with eyes as dark and unforgiving as the world he commanded. He threw his own body over mine, shielding me from the heat and the blood that splattered the walls. He had whispered against my hair, his voice rough but steady. "You are safe. You are a Caldwell now." For 10 years, that promise had been my religion. In this gilded cage of marble floors and silent, watchful bodyguards, Ethan was my god. He was the one who bought me a nightlight when I was 10 because the nightmares wouldn't stop. A small ceramic cat that cast a soft, unwavering glow. "It will keep the monsters away," he'd said, his large hand gentle as he plugged it in. He was the monster, of course. I knew that. The world knew that, but he was my monster. And he kept all the others at bay. Then, on my 17th birthday, I did the stupidest thing a girl in my position could do. I wrote him a letter. A confession poured out in clumsy, heartfelt sentences, stained with a drop of my own blood for dramatic teenage effect. I told him I loved him. I found the letter ripped into 1,000 tiny pieces in the trash can outside his study. He cornered me in the library that night, his body caging me against a shelf of leather-bound books. His eyes were blazing with a fury I had never seen directed at me. "Don't ever love me, Claire," he'd snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You love me, and you will die, do you understand?" I understood, but I didn't believe him. It felt like a test. Another twisted way of protecting me. Now, staring at the face of Victoria Langston smiling beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, I knew. It wasn't a test, it was a prophecy. He brought her to the estate that evening. I was standing on the grand staircase when they walked in. Victoria was everything. I wasn't tall, poised with the kind of sharp, beautiful edges that promised a fight. She moved like she already owned the place. Ethan's eyes found mine. There was no warmth, no apology, just a flat, cold command. "Clara," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "This is Victoria. You will refer to her as the future mistress of the Caldwell family." The words were a physical blow, mistress. The title that should have been Victoria's smile was a weapon. It is a pleasure to finally meet the little canary Ethan keeps so safely in his cage. My hands went cold. I could feel the eyes of every guard, every servant. On me, I was a Harper by blood, a Caldwell by charity, a stray dog he'd picked from the wreckage of his enemies. And now, the true queen had arrived to claim her throne. That night, locked in my bedroom, I stared at my reflection. My hair, a sheet of pale gold, fell to my waist. Ethan had always loved my hair. He'd once told me it was the only pure thing in his world. I walked into my bathroom, found the shears we used for cutting flower stems in the garden, and held a thick lock of that pure golden hair in my hand. Snip. It fell to the cold tile floor, a dead thing. Snip, snip, snip. I didn't stop until it was all gone, hacked off in uneven, jagged chunks around my ears. I looked feral, ruined. I walked out onto my balcony, the cold night air biting at my newly exposed neck. From a hidden pocket in my jacket, I pulled out a cigarette, stolen from one of the guards. My hands trembled as I lit it, the unfamiliar sting of smoke hitting the back of my throat. I coughed, my eyes watering. I was no longer pure, I was no longer his, I was nothing. And when you have nothing left to lose. I took another drag, letting the smoke fill me, and made a promise to the unforgiving New York skyline. I would get out, or I would die trying. The little ceramic cat nightlight sat on my bedside table, its soft glow a familiar comfort against the darkness. For 10 years it had chased away my nightmares. Tonight, it felt like a mockery. I reached over and yanked the plug from the wall. The room plunged into an oppressive blackness, so thick I felt like I was suffocating. Good, I wanted to feel it. I wanted the darkness to swallow me whole. My bare feet padded across the cold wooden floor to my closet. I pulled down a dusty duffel bag from the top shelf. One by one, I gathered the ghosts of my life with Ethan. The small silver locket with the Caldwell crest he'd given me for my 15th birthday. The bottle of Coral Sea perfume he'd bought me because he said it smelled like a place he'd take me to one day. A place with no blood and no secrets. They all went into the bag. Relics of a dead faith. Under my bed was a locked wooden box. Inside was my diary. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the frantic, girlish script. It was a pathetic history of my devotion. Every kind word, every small gesture from him was recorded and analyzed like scripture. Then I found it. A page from years ago after a rival had tried to send me a message by having his thugs follow me home from school. Ethan had dealt with them. I never saw them again. That night, he'd found my diary open on my desk. He didn't say anything, but the next morning, I found a new entry written in his sharp, aggressive hand. It wasn't in ink, it was in blood. Claire is Caldwell property. Touch her and die. Property. The word slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. Not a sister, not a ward, not even a person. I was a thing, an asset to be protected, like his cars or his collection of antique weapons. His protection wasn't about love, it was about ownership. A sob tore from my throat, raw and ugly. With frantic, shaking hands, I began to rip the pages from the diary. I tore through every cherished memory, every secret hope, until all that was left was a pile of confetti-sized pieces of my own foolish heart. The next day, Victoria officially moved into the room adjoining Ethan's my room. The one I used to have before I was moved to the guest wing last year because I was becoming a woman. She summoned me to the sitting room. The entire family, Ethan's capos, his lieutenants, was there, a silent audience for my humiliation. Victoria smiled, a condescending, placid expression. Clara, darling, a welcome gift. She held up a necklace. It wasn't the delicate silver or gold I was used to. It was a thick, gaudy band of some cheap, dark metal, studded with glittering stones that formed the Langston family crest. It wasn't a necklace, it was a collar. My breath hitched. I was allergic to cheap alloys. Ethan knew this. He'd once thrown away a bracelet a school friend had given me. His lip curled in disgust as he saw the red rash forming on my wrist. I looked at him, pleading with my eyes. Don't do this, please. His face was a mask of indifference. He met my gaze, his dark eyes cold and empty, and delivered the sentence. Take it. His voice was flat, final. It was an order in front of everyone. He was showing them my new place in the hierarchy. Below him, below her. My hands trembled as I reached for the collar. Victoria's fingers brushed against mine as she fastened it around my neck. The metal was cold, heavy. It suits you, she purred, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every pet should have a collar. The laughter was polite, but it felt like stones being thrown at me. I stood there. My head bowed as the metal began to warm against my skin. The familiar burning itch started almost immediately. a ring of fire tightening around my throat. I didn't scratch it. I didn't cry. I just stood there and let it burn, branding me with the truth. I was property, and I had just been handed over to a new owner. That night, the sounds from Ethan's bedroom bled through the walls. Muffled laughter, the low murmur of voices, the squeak of bed springs. I lay in my own bed, stiff as a corpse, staring at the ceiling. The cheap metal collar burned my skin, a constant, agonizing reminder of my place. I finally gave up on sleep and went to the balcony, lighting another cigarette. The smoke was still harsh, but the burn in my lungs was a welcome distraction from the fire around my neck. I smoked the entire pack, one after another, until the sun began to stain the horizon a sickly gray. The next morning, I found Victoria in the dining room, sipping tea as if she'd lived here her whole life. She looked up at me, her eyes lingering on my butchered hair and the raw, red welt on my neck. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Ethan's birthday is in a few weeks," she said, her voice like honey laced with poison. "It is also going to be our engagement party. I was thinking of a theme. What do you think he'd like? You've known him for so long." The question was a calculated strike. She was asking me to plan the celebration of my own demise. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A rainy night, years ago, Ethan had just returned from a business meeting, his knuckles bruised and a fresh cut over his eye. He'd found me in the kitchen, and for a rare moment, the mask had slipped. He'd looked tired, almost haunted. He had leaned against the counter, his voice barely a whisper. "When I am done with all this, Claire, when all my enemies are gone, I am going to take you to my private island. No one will ever find us there." The memory was so vivid it hurt. I pushed it down, deep into the black hole where I kept all the other beautiful lies. "I wouldn't know," I said, my voice hollow. "I don't concern myself with Don Caldwell's affairs." Just then, Ethan walked in. He looked from me to Victoria, his gaze impassive. "My affairs," he said, his voice clipping the air, "are none of your concern." He was speaking to me, reinforcing the boundary he had drawn. I turned to leave, my cheeks burning with shame. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "To the embassy," I said, my voice tight. "I need to handle my visa for school." The lie came easily. The forged university acceptance letter from Toronto was tucked safely in my purse. Ethan's entire demeanor shifted. The indifference vanished, replaced by a flash of violent possession. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing my chin and forcing me to look at him. His fingers dug into my jaw, hard. "What school?" he hissed. "And with who? Don't think I don't know what you are, Clara. You dare to start running around with some filthy mutt from outside these walls, and I will break his legs, then I'll break yours." His words were laced with a familiar, terrifying jealousy, the same jealousy that had once made me feel safe, cherished. Now it just felt like a chain. Victoria stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Ethan, darling, let her go. You are scaring her. She is just a child." He released me, his eyes still boring into mine. I stumbled back, the urge to touch my bruised jaw overwhelming. I resisted. I would not show weakness, not in front of her. Later that day, standing outside the Canadian embassy, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Ethan's private social media account, one I was privileged to follow. He had posted a photo. It was a professional shot of him and Victoria. He was in a perfectly tailored suit, she in a stunning evening gown, standing before the massive carved Caldwell family crest in the Grand Hall. They looked like a king and queen. The caption was 2 words: "My queen, my vision swam." It felt like the world tilted on its axis, throwing me off balance. That word queen. He had killed the princess and crowned a new queen, all in one fell swoop. My fingers moved on their own, tapping out a comment from a new anonymous account I'd created, just for this purpose. I wrote it in Latin, a language he'd forced me to learn, a language of empires and endings, sic transit gloria mundi, thus passes the glory of the world. Then I blocked him. I blocked his account, deleted his number, and wiped every digital trace of him from my life. It was over. The invitation was delivered by one of the younger Caldwell soldiers, a boy named Noah with eyes that still held a flicker of kindness. It was for a private party, a small gathering of the family's inner circle. "Will you come, Claire?" he asked, his voice hesitant. He glanced over his shoulder as if expecting Ethan to materialize from the shadows. The dawn, will he be there? In the past, the question would have been absurd. Where Ethan went, I went. I was his shadow, his little ghost. I looked at Noah, his hopeful face a painful reminder of a life that was no longer mine. For the first time, I verbally severed the tie that had bound me to Ethan for a decade. "He has more important people to be with," I said, my voice calm and distant. Noah's face fell, but he nodded in understanding. He knew, as everyone now knew, that my time as the Dawn's favored pet was over. That night, I had a nightmare. I was back in the library, the smell of old paper and leather thick in the air. Ethan stood before me, but his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a stranger, cold and dead. In his hand, he held a sleek black pistol. He raised it slowly, aiming it directly at my forehead. "Traitors to the Caldwell family only have one way out," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. The blast was deafening. I woke up with a gasp, my body drenched in a cold sweat, the phantom pain of a bullet hole throbbing in my head. The dream was a warning, my subconscious screaming at me what my heart already knew. There was no gentle exit from this life. Ethan would not let me just walk away. To him, leaving was the ultimate betrayal. A frantic energy seized me. I scrambled out of bed and dragged the duffel bag of his gifts from my closet. It wasn't enough. I had to erase everything. Every memory, every piece of evidence that the girl who loved Ethan Caldwell had ever existed. I was dragging the bag down the main staircase, intending to take it to the incinerator in the basement, when the front door opened. Ethan and Victoria walked in, laughing at something she'd said. The sound died in their throats when they saw me. Ethan's eyes locked on the bag in my hand. His face was unreadable. He walked towards me, his steps silent and predatory. Without a word, he ripped the duffel bag from my grasp. I thought he would open it, confront me with the pathetic collection of his discarded affections. He didn't. He turned and handed the bag to the guard at the door. "Burn it," he commanded, his voice flat and hard as steel. The guard nodded and disappeared into the night. Ethan turned back to me, his gaze sweeping over me with cold appraisal. My hacked hair, my defiant stance. He had just incinerated a decade of our history without blinking. "I've arranged for your new school," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It is here in New York. You are not going anywhere." The words were a prison sentence. He was pushing me away with one hand and caging me with the other. He didn't want me, but he would never, ever let me go. As I walked back up the stairs, my feet heavy as lead, I heard Victoria's voice drift up from the foyer. It was a soft, cloying purr. "You were so harsh with her, Ethan. Was it because of what happened last night?" Ethan's reply was sharp enough to cut glass. "She is an adult. It is time she learned her place. My place below them, an inconvenience. A piece of property to be managed." The last flickering ember of hope inside me finally died, leaving nothing but cold, hard ash. The next week was a blur of calculated cruelty. The family held a formal gathering to welcome their alliance with the Langstons. I was forced to attend. Known of Ethan's old capos, a man who had known me since I was a child, cornered me by the bar. He gestured towards me with his glass. "Your little canary is all grown up. Don," he said to Ethan, who was standing nearby. Ethan didn't even look at me. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes scanning the room. "She is an adult now," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden lull of conversation. "Not my concern anymore." The words were a public declaration, a withdrawal of protection, in our world. That was a death sentence. I felt the shift in the room immediately. The gazes that fell on me were no longer respectful or cautious. They were hungry, predatory. I was no longer Ethan Caldwell's untouchable ward. I was open season. Later, Victoria staged a clumsy stumble, collapsing dramatically towards Ethan. He caught her with practiced ease, scooping her up into his arms in a classic bridal carry. He didn't look angry or annoyed. He looked like a king claiming his prize, a possessive, protective fire in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. A fire that was no longer for me. He carried her out of the room amidst a chorus of appreciative murmurs. An old family friend, Eleanor, watched them go, her expression sad. She turned to me. He once had 3 men executed just for whistling at you on the street, she murmured. We all thought you would be his weakness forever. Weaknesses get cut away, I thought. My heart a cold, tight knot in my chest. The party ended, and as if on cue, the sky opened up. A torrential downpour lashed against the windows. I watched as Ethan escorted Victoria to their car, holding a large black umbrella over her, shielding her completely while his own shoulder got soaked. My mind flashed back to another rainy night, when I was 12 and terrified of the thunder. He had found me huddled in the hallway and walked me back to my room, holding this very umbrella over my head even though we were indoors. My umbrella will always be for you, Claire, he had promised. Now, that promise was a lie. I stood alone on the porch, with no umbrella and no one waiting for me. I looked at the sheets of rain, a solid wall of gray between me and the world. Then, I took a deep breath and walked straight into it. The rain was icy cold, shocking my system. It plastered my short, ragged hair to my skull and soaked through my dress in seconds. I didn't run. I walked, letting the storm wash over me, hoping it could cleanse the filth and the pain from my soul. Back in my room, shivering and dripping on the expensive rug, my phone buzzed with a notification from an encrypted app. It was a new message. Flight is arranged, 7 days from now, on Ethan Caldwell's birthday. We will meet you in Toronto. Welcome home, my daughter. J.H. James Harper, my father. A shaky breath escaped my lips. It was real. A lifeline. Ethan's birthday, the day he entered the world, would be the day I finally escaped it. My rebirth would be his celebration. The irony was so bitter, so perfect. It was almost sweet. The days leading up to my escape were a strange, hollow performance. I packed a single small suitcase with newly purchased, untraceable clothes. Everything else. Every book, every trinket, every piece of clothing Ethan had ever bought me. I sorted into boxes. I called a discreet company that specialized in cleaning out the homes of the recently deceased, telling them I was handling an old estate. They asked no questions. On the day the cleaners were scheduled to arrive, Ethan came home early. He found me in my room, which was already stripped bare, looking sterile and impersonal, like a cheap hotel room between guests. His eyes swept over the empty shelves and bare walls, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Confusion? Annoyance? What is this? He asked. Spring cleaning, I said, my voice even. I am donating some things, making space. He didn't believe me, but he didn't press it. He seemed distracted, a deep line etched between his brows. My birthday party is tonight, he said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement of fact. I know, I replied. I'll be there to say a final goodbye. The words hung in the air between us. He thought I meant a goodbye to my childhood, to my place as his ward. He had no idea how final it would truly be. We'll see, was all he said before turning and leaving me in the empty room. That afternoon, I found my old sketchbooks. For years, I had drawn him. Ethan smiling, a rare and precious sight. Ethan sleeping in his study chair. Ethan with his back to me, staring out at the city skyline, page after page of my obsession. I turned to the last blank page. With a steady hand, I drew him one last time. I drew the man from the engagement photo. Ethan standing beside Victoria, a crown on his head and a stranger in his eyes. He was no longer my dark protector, he was a king, and she was his queen. Beneath the drawing, I wrote a simple inscription, "May your empire last forever." It felt like closing a coffin. That night, the night before his birthday, the night before my freedom, he came to my room. The scent of whiskey hit me first, heavy and sharp. He was drunk, stumbling through the doorway he hadn't entered in years. His eyes were unfocused, clouded with a pain so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "Victoria?" he slurred, reaching for me. My blood ran cold. He thought I was her. Before I could speak, he had me in his arms, his grip desperate. He buried his face in my neck, his body trembling. "Why?" he rasped, his voice thick with anguish. "Why don't you understand what I am doing?" He pulled back, his hands framing my face. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, a ghost of a forgotten tenderness. But his eyes weren't seeing me. They were seeing her. Then he kissed me. It was nothing like I had ever imagined. It was brutal and desperate, a kiss born of self-loathing and regret. It tasted of expensive liquor and a sorrow so profound, it felt like I was drowning in it. He pushed me back towards the bed, his weight pinning me down, his lips never leaving mine. It was a violation, an act of desecration on the altar of my dead love, and through it all, as his hands tangled in my brutally short hair, he whispered her name. Victoria. The kiss was a blade, slicing through the last threads of my devotion to Ethan Caldwell. His lips pressed against mine, heavy with whiskey and desperation. But it was her name, Victoria, that shattered me. My body went rigid beneath his weight, my hands fisted at my sides as his fingers tangled in the jagged remnants of my hair. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in to witness my final humiliation. I shoved against his chest, my nails digging into the fabric of his shirt, and he stumbled back, his unfocused eyes blinking as if waking from a trance. "Clara?" His voice was a slurred question, laced with confusion and something darker. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of guilt. He swayed, gripping the door frame for balance, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that had once felt like safety, but now loomed like a prison. "Get out," I whispered, my voice raw, trembling with a fury I hadn't known I could feel. My lips burned where his had been, not with passion but with betrayal. "Get out, Ethan." He stared at me, his dark eyes clearing for a moment, as if seeing me for the first time in years. The man who had pulled me from the fire, who had promised to protect me, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a king drunk on power and liquor, blind to the wreckage he'd left in his wake. He opened his mouth perhaps to speak, to explain, but no words came. Instead, he turned and staggered out, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood there, my breath ragged, my heart pounding like a war drum. The room felt too small, too empty, the absence of him a physical ache, even as I hated him for it. I crossed to the balcony, the cold night air biting at my skin, and lit another stolen cigarette. The smoke curled into the darkness, a fleeting rebellion against the cage I'd lived in for a decade. Tomorrow was his birthday. Tomorrow was my escape. Tomorrow, I would be free. The morning of Ethan's birthday dawned gray and heavy, the sky bruised with clouds that promised rain. The estate was alive with preparations for the engagement party, a glittering spectacle meant to cement the alliance between the Caldwell and Langston families. Servants bustled through the halls, carrying trays of crystal glasses and arrangements of blood-red roses. Victoria's laughter echoed from the grand dining room, sharp and triumphant, as she directed the staff with the ease of someone who had already claimed her throne. I stayed in my room, my suitcase packed and hidden beneath the bed. The forged acceptance letter from the University of Toronto was tucked into my purse, along with a burner phone and a single photograph, a faded Polaroid of me and Ethan from years ago, taken on a rare day when he'd smiled. I hadn't kept it out of sentimentality. It was a reminder of what I was leaving behind, a talisman to steel my resolve. A knock at the door startled me. It was Noah, the young soldier with kind eyes. He held a small envelope, his expression hesitant. "Claire, this came for you. It's unmarked." I took it, my fingers steady, despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. "Thank you, Noah," he lingered, glancing at the barren room. "You're really leaving, aren't you?" I met his gaze, my voice firm. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." He nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing his face, and left without another word. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting unfamiliar but precise. Toronto Pearson International Airport, Terminal 1, 11:45 p.m. Look for the man in the black coat with a red scarf. He will take you to your father, my father, James Harper. The man Ethan had spent a decade trying to destroy. The man who had left me to die in that fire all those years ago, only to reach out now, when I was nothing but a discarded pet. I didn't trust him, but I trusted Ethan less. This was my only way out. I spent the day moving through the estate like a ghost, avoiding Victoria's sharp gaze and Ethan's brooding presence. The party was set to begin at 8, and I knew I had to play my part until the moment I could slip away. I dressed in a simple black dress, the only one I hadn't packed or donated, and let my short, uneven hair fall loose around my face. The collar Victoria had forced on me was gone, tossed into a drawer where it could no longer burn my skin. The red welt on my neck had faded to a dull ache, a reminder of my place in this world, or lack thereof. The grand hall was a vision of opulence, chandeliers dripping with crystal, tables laden with champagne and delicacies. The guests were a who's who of the criminal underworld, their tailored suits and glittering gowns, a thin veneer over their brutality. Victoria stood at the center of it all, radiant in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin. Ethan was at her side, his expression unreadable, his dark suit immaculate. He hadn't looked at me since the night before, and I was grateful for it. Every glance from him felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I lingered at the edges of the crowd, sipping a glass of water to keep my hands occupied. Eleanor, the old family friend, approached me, her eyes soft with pity. "You look like you're planning a funeral, not a party," she said quietly. "Maybe I am," I replied, my voice low. "Mine." Her expression tightened, but before she could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Clara, come here, darling." The room stilled, all eyes turning to me. I forced my feet to move, each step a battle against the urge to run. Victoria's smile was a predator's, her eyes gleaming with malice. "We have a special gift for Ethan tonight," she announced, gesturing to a velvet box on the table beside her. "And I thought you, as his ward, should present it." My stomach churned. This was another of her games, another way to remind me of my place. I glanced at Ethan, searching for a sign of protest, but his face was a mask, his eyes fixed on the box. I stepped forward, my hands steady as I opened it. Inside was a gold signet ring, engraved with the intertwined crests of the Caldwell and Langston families, a symbol of their union, their empire. "Put it on him," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I took the ring, its weight heavy in my palm. Ethan extended his hand, and for a moment our eyes met. There was something there, pain perhaps, or a flicker of the boy who had saved me from the fire. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold indifference I'd come to know. I slipped the ring onto his finger, my touch brief, clinical. The room erupted in applause, but it felt like a dirge. "Thank you, Clara," Victoria said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've always been so loyal." The word was a slap, and I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. I stepped back, my role in her theater complete. The party resumed, the guests' laughter and chatter swallowing the moment. I slipped away, my heart pounding as I checked the time. 9:30, 2 hours until my flight. I made my way to the guest wing, my steps quick but silent. The estate was a labyrinth, but I knew every corner, every shadow. I retrieved my suitcase and purse, tucking the burner phone into my pocket. The rain had started again, a soft patter against the windows, and I welcomed it. It would mask my departure. As I reached the side entrance, a hand grabbed my arm, spinning me around. It was Ethan. His eyes were clearer now, the whiskey haze gone, replaced by a storm of emotions I couldn't name. "Where are you going?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. I yanked my arm free, my heart racing. "Away from you." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You don't get to leave, Claire. You're mine." The words were a punch to the gut, reigniting a fire I'd thought was dead. "I was never yours," I spat, my voice shaking with years of pent up rage. "You made that clear when you chose her, when you put that collar on me, when you kissed me and called her name." His face paled, the memory of last night a wound we both carried. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything I've done, I did to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "You made me your pet, Ethan, your property, and now you've traded me for a better model. I'm done being your prisoner." He reached for me, but I stepped back, my hand on the door. "Don't," I warned. "If you ever cared for me, even a little, you'll let me go." His hand froze, his eyes searching mine. For the first time, I saw something raw, unguarded, fear, maybe, or love twisted into something unrecognizable. "Claire," he whispered, but I was already gone, slipping into the rain-soaked night. The drive to the airport was a blur, the city lights streaking past like tears. The driver, a silent man arranged by my father, didn't ask questions. I clutched the burner phone, checking the time obsessively. 11:15. I was cutting it close. Toronto Pearson International Airport was a hive of activity, even at this hour. I scanned the crowd in Terminal 1, my heart pounding as I searched for the man in the black coat and red scarf. There, near the check, in counters, a tall figure with graying hair and a sharp, angular face. He nodded once, his eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Clara Harper?" he asked, his voice low, accented with the faint lilt of an Italian upbringing. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." He gestured toward a side exit. "This way, the jet is waiting." I followed him, my suitcase rolling behind me, the weight of my old life dragging at my heels. The private jet was small but sleek, its interior a stark contrast to the opulence of the Caldwell estate. I sank into a leather seat, my hands trembling as I buckled in. The man sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "Your father will meet us in Vancouver," he said. "He's been waiting for this day." I didn't respond. James Harper was a stranger to me, a name tied to blood and betrayal. I didn't know if I was running to him or simply away from Ethan. Either way, I was free. The jet took off, the city shrinking beneath me, its lights swallowed by the clouds. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the engines drown out the ache in my chest. For the first time in a decade, I felt the weight of the Caldwell name lift from my shoulders. Vancouver was cold, the air sharp with the promise of winter. James Harper waited on the tarmac, a tall man with my pale gold hair and eyes that carried the weight of a lifetime in the shadows. He didn't embrace me, didn't offer words of warmth. Instead, he studied me, his gaze clinical, as if assessing a weapon. "You look like your mother," he said finally, his voice rough. "She was a fighter too." I didn't know how to respond. My mother was a ghost, a memory burned away in the fire that had taken everything. I followed him to a black SUV, the city unfolding around us in a blur of glass and steel. His compound was a fortress, hidden in the mountains, a stark contrast to the Caldwell estate's ostentatious wealth. It was functional, cold, built for war. Over the next few weeks, I learned the truth about my father. He wasn't the monster Ethan had painted him to be, but he wasn't a saint either. He was a man driven by vengeance, his life consumed by the need to destroy the Caldwell empire. He had left me in that fire not out of cruelty, but because he believed I was safer in Ethan's hands than in his own war. "Torn world, it was a choice he regretted," he said. But I wasn't sure I believed him. Still, he gave me something Ethan never had. Agency. He taught me to shoot, to fight, to navigate the underworld as a player, not a pawn. I trained alongside his soldiers, my body growing stronger, my mind sharper. The girl who had loved Ethan Caldwell was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who could survive. But Ethan wasn't done with me. 6 months later, a package arrived at the compound, delivered by a courier who vanished before anyone could question him. Inside was a single item, the ceramic cat nightlight Ethan had given me when I was 10. Its soft glow mocked me, a reminder of the promises he'd broken. Tucked beneath it was a note in his sharp, aggressive handwriting. "You can run, Claire, but you'll always be mine." The words sent a chill down my spine, but they also ignited something else. Rage. I wasn't his anymore. I wasn't anyone's. I crushed the nightlight under my boot, the porcelain shattering into 1,000 pieces, and burned the note in the fireplace. James watched, his expression unreadable. "He's coming for you," he said. "He won't let you go." "Then let him come," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm not afraid of him." But I was, deep down, in the part of me that still remembered his touch, his voice. I was terrified. Not of his violence, but of what he could still make me feel. The confrontation came on a rainy night, a year after my escape. James's intelligence network had picked up chatter that Ethan was in Vancouver, hunting for me. I should have run, should have disappeared into another city, another life. But I was tired of running. I wanted to face him, to end this once and for all. We met in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the rain hammering the tin roof like gunfire. Ethan stood alone, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of a single bulb. He was thinner than I remembered, his face haggard, as if the weight of his empire had finally begun to crush him. "Claire," he said, his voice raw, almost broken. "Why?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected threats, violence, not this quiet, desperate plea. "Why?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "You threw me away, Ethan. You chose her. You made me nothing." He flinched, the movement so subtle I almost missed it. "I didn't choose her," he said, his words heavy with exhaustion. "I chose survival, for me, for you. The Langstons would have killed us both if I hadn't agreed to the alliance." I laughed, the sound harsh in the empty space. "You expect me to believe that? You let her collar me. You let her humiliate me. You kissed me and called her name." His eyes darkened, pain flashing across his face. "I was drunk. I was weak, I thought. I thought I could push you away, make you hate me, so you'd be safe. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything." I stepped closer, my gun steady in my hand, the weight of it grounding me. "You don't get to rewrite the story now, Ethan. You don't get to play the martyr. I loved you, and you broke me." He didn't move, didn't flinch, even as I raised the gun to his chest. "Then shoot me," he said, his voice steady. "If that's what it takes to make you free, do it." My finger trembled on the trigger. I wanted to hate him, to pull the trigger and end the pain he'd caused me, but the truth was, I couldn't. Not because I still loved him, though a part of me always would, but because I wasn't him. I wasn't a killer. I lowered the gun, my breath hitching. "I'm not you," I said. "I'm not a monster." He closed his eyes, a single tear tracking down his cheek. It was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. "I'm sorry, Claire," he whispered, "for everything." I turned away, my heart a tangled mess of anger and grief. "Don't follow me," I said. "Don't look for me. If you ever cared for me, let me go." He didn't respond, and I didn't look back. I walked out into the rain, the cold washing over me, cleansing me of the past. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time, I knew I was free. Years passed. I built a new life, far from the shadows of the Caldwell and Harper empires. I became a teacher, of all things, in a small coastal town in British Columbia where the air smelled of salt and freedom. I taught literature to teenagers who had no idea about the world I'd come from, and in their laughter, their small rebellions, I found a kind of peace. Ethan never came for me. I heard whispers, of course. The Caldwell Empire had crumbled, torn apart by internal betrayals and the Langstons' greed. Victoria had left him, or he had left her. The stories varied. James Harper died in a shootout, his war finally over. I mourned him, in my way, but I didn't return to that life. One spring morning, as I was grading papers in my small apartment, a package arrived. No return address, no note. Just a small box containing a single item, a new ceramic cat nightlight, identical to the one Ethan had given me all those years ago. I stared at it, my heart stuttering, and then I smiled. I plugged it in, its soft glow filling the room. Not because I needed it, but because it was a reminder, not of Ethan, but of the girl I'd been, and the woman I'd become. I had survived. I had found my own light, and that was enough.